I first began my work as an occupational therapist 5 years ago, working to support autistic children and youth and their ability to learn and grow. As someone who prioritized research-informed strategies, I was surprised to learn that I was using techniques that were not only unhelpful, but actually quite harmful to the autistic community. And some examples of these techniques were conducting reinforcement, token economies, improving a child's sensory processing patterns, and promoting neurotypical social skills. Autistic voices were missing from my education, my training, the research, and I had no idea how the autistic community felt about the methods I was using, let alone the harm I was causing. I was a very ableist practicing therapist, and I was absolutely failing my autistic clients. It wasn't until I witnessed a child demonstrating excitement by flapping their hands and seeing another therapist attempting to stop that child from stimming that I began to not only question what the stimming meant for the child, but began to explore autistic ways of living. Now, as a neurodivergent OT, Katherine and I look forward to discussing how you can avoid making the same mistakes that I made and reflect on how you work with or view autistic individuals. It can be an extremely arduous process, but it's what our autistic clients and friends deserve, and is the only way that we can support to make the world more validating of autistic ways of living.
Autism is a culture that needs to be recognized and celebrated. And that is why, during this talk, we intentionally say autistic person rather than person with autism. The autistic community has asked that we make this shift away from person-first language and towards identity-first language. This shift recognizes autism as an essential part of an individual's identity. Just as we recognize gender and sexuality as core parts of an individual's identity, it is important to recognize disability as it changes the way we move throughout the world. Autism is a core part of many individuals' identities, and that is why, instead of person with autism, we say autistic person.
Throughout this talk, you will hear us use the term neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is described as the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. And these different ways are valid forms of living. There is no one right way of thinking and learning, and differences are not viewed as deficits. It's about switching the narrative, changing the story, and empowering.
As practitioners, caregivers, and teachers, we can shift our thinking away from a deficit-based approach and empower autistic individuals, validate their identity, and incorporate their interests into our treatment. This process is called being strengths-based. When we incorporate principles of strengths-based practice, goals and treatment looks more like a partnership between the autistic individual, practitioner, and family. Some common traits of a strengths-based approach are including environmental supports and accommodations in line with an individual's learning differences and preferences, authentic collaboration with the autistic individual, incorporating interest in meaningful ways rather than as reinforcers, moving away from compliance and presuming competence, and moving away from a deficit model and redefining deficits as differences, such as sensory processing experiences. When it comes to strengths-based practice, our focus is less on changing the individual and more on partnering with the autistic individual and their family to validate their autistic identity.
So what does applying this strengths-based practice actually look like? Well, today we want to introduce you to Kai. Kai is not a real child, but rather a compilation of many children we have worked with and their stories. During this talk, we are going to use them to demonstrate concrete examples of how to move away from traditional models of thinking and viewing autistic individuals and towards ways that amplify and empower the autistic community. We'll start with language. Language is important and powerful. By simply switching our terminology to being more affirming and less deficit-focused, we are promoting a world that is more validating for all sorts of individuals. Two examples of how language can shape the way we practice are attention-seeking and functioning labels. When referring to children, it is very common to use the term attention-seeking. This is usually seen as a negative thing. However, attention is a need we all have as human beings. When someone is trying to get your attention, they are trying to connect with you and be validated that they are there and that they are seen. By simply replacing attention-seeking with connection-seeking, we can reframe so-called bad behavior to a child seeking a vital human need. Language is powerful, and this simple change can help us take a step towards understanding where the child is coming from and honoring their perspective.
Many autistic individuals dislike the terms high and low functioning. Describing someone as low functioning is a heavily reductionist way to categorize someone and gives no semblance of what the individual can do. In contrast, high functioning is often used as a way to demonstrate neurotypicality, or someone who doesn't require many supports, which is often untrue. Instead, we can describe the specific supports someone might require, the amount of support, and their strengths. For example, Kai benefits from substantial support, such as a visual cue to participate in unstructured recess. And Kai benefits from minimal support, such as a verbal cue, to participate and advocate for self-regulatory breaks.
Now, we are not saying simply modifying your language or all that is needed to be more neurodiversity affirming. To be neurodiversity affirming requires continuous self-reflection of what you think you know, active listening to the communities of individuals you are attempting to serve, increasing your comfort in being wrong, and receiving feedback to better your practice. It is a process and not a single event. After modifying your language to reflect the needs and wants of the community you are working with, the next step towards being strengths-based is for you to learn how to regulate yourself. Regulation is an encompassing term for how our mind and body are feeling, such as emotions or having energy. As the saying goes, you can't pour from an empty cup. And if we are dysregulated, such as feeling mad, you're unwell, there is no way we will be the support partners our clients need. In order to assist others, it is important to take time to learn about your own sensory and regulation needs. Once you are regulated, we then determine if the learner is well regulated. If the individual is not regulated, no meaningful learning or participation can occur. When they are not regulated, one strengths-based approach to support the regulation is demonstrating, encouraging, or even exploring the learner's favorite methods of stimming.
As occupational therapy practitioners, we are experts in occupations, which are the things we do every day that give our life meaning and purpose, such as your role as a student in school, getting ready for the day, or coping with life's challenges. We advocate that autistic behaviors are occupations, with stimming being an intentional reclamation posed by autistic individuals, and is attempting to be normalized within our society. As mentioned earlier, we all need to be regulated, and stimming helps many individuals do just that. As partners to autistic individuals, we can help them to co-regulate. All people need assistance co-regulating. However, some may need more assistance than others. Kai does a great job using self-regulatory strategies. They rock when they need movement, and they flap their hands when they're excited. However, sometimes the environment is too much for Kai to regulate on their own. When this happens, as support partners, we can assist to collaborate and co-regulate. Kai finds movement incredibly soothing. The trampoline and deep pressure have been regulating for Kai in the past. So as partners, we can offer these to Kai, perhaps by using them ourselves or by placing an object related to the task within their view. If the learner is not well regulated, no meaningful learning or participation can occur. And that is why it is essential that we consider not only our own regulation, but the individual's regulation as well.
As we talked about earlier, we live in a society that emphasizes autistic people's deficits. So the next step is to consider the strengths of being autistic. All autistic individuals have skills, abilities, and strengths. Some common examples of autistic strengths are the ability to hyperfocus, honesty, their technical abilities, high amounts of energy, their loyalty, artistic talents, passionate, risk taker, and pattern finder. For example, Kai needed support in learning how to self-advocate for their needs when becoming overwhelmed. Traditional terminology for describing feelings such as mad, frustrated, happy, calm, they're very abstract for Kai, and they provided no functional support in learning how feelings are expressed within themselves and for communicating their needs. I learned right away Kai is a dinosaur wizard. Kai knows absolutely everything about dinosaurs. And by partnering with Kai's interest of dinosaurs, we utilized a visual guide of various dinosaurs and their energy levels. And they got to be the teacher and teach their family what the support means. Here is the energy meter already created by the fantastic advocacy organization, Autism Level Up. By creating a meaningful language using their interests, Kai was far more successful in self-advocating how they were feeling, and Kai's family was more able to connect with them by honing in on and cultivating their passion for dinosaurs.
There are plenty of times where an individual may need to work on developing skills, such as using an adaptive pencil for academic tasks, using environmental supports, or advocating for self-regulatory breaks. However, we need to ensure that the task is not only meaningful to the client and their family, but that adequate environmental supports are in place and that we are considering the individual's learning style, strengths, and preferences.
After identifying an individual's strengths, we can begin to think about our goals. Within my goals, I often include that unrestricted access to a support or accommodation is necessary prior to measuring the individual's performance to ensure that that support is there. The goals do become longer, but in a way, it protects the learner and it makes sure that they have what they need. So switching our goals from deficit to strengths-based will require a lot of unlearning, and that's okay. I mean, think about it. We are constantly reminded of and influenced by society's dominant perspective that autism is comprised of deficits and that these deficits need fixing. Additionally, healthcare services often are administered without the knowledge of what the community prioritizes. So to also continue to support amplifying autistic voices, I make sure that my goals target what many within the autistic community have identified as their health and well-being priorities, including the learner's self-esteem, their self-advocacy skills, positive mental health, social participation on their terms, and their quality of life. So some examples of strengths-based goals with Kai are, when provided with unrestricted access to environmental supports, Kai will self-advocate for a regulatory strategy during a challenging task. Or, Kai's family will demonstrate competency in embracing Kai's play style and report satisfaction with their ability to connect with Kai and play. These goals really highlight how they empower the learner and advocate to others how they can better understand and embrace Kai's differences.
Next, we need to think about how to include environmental supports and accommodations in line with an individual's learning differences and preferences. I like to think about how I can adjust the environment to support the individual. Can I dim the lights or remove background noise? If I can't change the environment, can I add support instead? Can I advocate for the individual to have headphones or movement breaks? Instead of changing the individual to fit the environment, we get to change the environment to fit the individual.
Once we have created an environment that supports the child and we have offered adequate accommodations, we get to do our favorite part, incorporating interests. Autistic people often have incredibly intense interests. Historically, rather than incorporating these interests and respecting them, we have decided that these interests are too intense and that they need to be redirected or expanded because they're often described as being harmful or meaningless. Participation in passionate interests have been shown to reduce anxiety, enhance activities, social bonding, higher reported autistic well-being, and quality of life. So instead, with this approach, we get to learn and enjoy these incredibly intense interests, rather than removing something that the autistic person loves.
When incorporating interest, it is important to consider why the autistic person is so excited about this topic or item. And it will most likely vary for different autistic people. One autistic individual might be excited about Sesame Street because of the way Elmo's voice sounds to their ears. Another may enjoy the consistency of characters and learning facts about each one. Once I identify why an interest is so important to the individual, I get to find ways to authentically engage it. If Kai loves Sesame Street, I am not putting Sesame Street characters on a worksheet so that Kai works on their handwriting. That is not incorporating interest. Instead, I may help Kai look up facts about each Sesame Street character and suggest they write it down so they can take it home later. In both examples, Kai is working on writing. However, one expects Kai to get excited about writing because of pictures on a worksheet, and the other authentically engages Kai's interests and helps them achieve their goal while also happening to work on handwriting.
As we mentioned earlier, an essential part of being neurodiversity affirming is letting go of compliance in favor of presuming competence and empowering. As previously mentioned by an incredible researcher we look up to, Dr. Amy Laurent, we need to stop focusing on controlling behaviors or behavior management. That should never be the goal. Presuming competence means to assume an autistic person has the capacity to think, learn, and understand. It's assuming that they are not inherently incapable and that they just need the right supports and systems to help them succeed. By making this shift from attempting to make autistic individuals indistinguishable from their peers to forming partnership and supporting positive autistic identity and well-being, we acknowledge and we empower. So what does strengths-based practice actually look like? It looks like making sure that you are well-regulated before attempting to support the learner. It looks like focusing on areas of strengths rather than focusing on areas of deficits. It also looks like changing our goals so they focus on changing the environment rather than focusing on changing the individual. It looks like incorporating interests, presuming competence, and it looks like changing our language so we are reframing our mindset.
When we think of autism, often we think of a horrible disease that needs to be cured through hundreds of hours of therapy. Or we think of Rain Man and we call it a superpower. But autistic people have been asking us for years to think of them not as a deficit or as a superhuman, but as people with different brains. Not better, not worse, just different. Autism can be both a valid form of human diversity while acknowledging the need for support. So let's let go of neurotypical norms. An autistic person will never be neurotypical, and that's okay. We challenge you to join us and consider and discover how strengths-based practice can not only improve the relationship between you and the autistic people in your own life, but make a better world for the autistic community.